This is a football podcast about Manchester United, and usually you'd like to talk about football, but the football is awful, and there are plenty of reasons for that. Man United have just released their financial results for the latest quarter earlier on Wednesday, and I'm sorry, guys, this might have to be a bit of a dig into that and a bit of a dig into the financials. That I've been working on this for a couple of days now, and I feel like not everything is going to be absolutely accurate, obviously, but I just feel as though the sentiment around United at the moment is rightfully so awful. And INEOS are making some awfully difficult, ruthless, and unpopular decisions. The announcements or the leaks of those decisions are coming out at really terrible times. And like I say, sentiment is all over the place at the moment. United are 15th in the Premier League. No real signs of this turning around, but INEOS say that they have a plan. And as much as I agree with the criticism that they're getting, and as much as I agree with the criticism of the model of shared ownership, the full sale, obviously, I think everybody who's a United fan wants a full sale and has wanted a full sale, but that was never a realistic possibility for me with the offers that were on the table for the price that the Glazers wanted at the time that the club was up for sale. And this is what we're left with. This is the reality of Manchester United at the moment. This is the reality of INEOS's way of doing things. And there are plenty of places that will try and tear them down. And look, I completely agree. I think that is some of the decisions they're making are massively unpopular. There's a lot of favor with the fan base that they built when they bought their share in the club that has been lost because of the decisions that they're making, because of how ruthless they've been to both the match-going fans, the staff at the club. And you look at the players and the playing staff on loads and loads of massive wages, and you think, why didn't you just do it to those players and really cut? Because that's where the difference is going to be made. Now, I think they've tried to do that. But on this show, I'll talk a little bit about where I think the savings could be made over the course of the next few months and how this is a difficult time, but it may get easier over the next year or two. Unfortunately, just these ruthless decisions are what INEOS feel like they have to do. I will say that it is awful to watch from the outside, awful to see from the outside when it impacts people. It is terrible. But I think my approach with this today is to just try and explain why I think they're doing this and maybe understand their side of the agenda. And ultimately, I think explain why I think what they're doing is in the best interests of the football club. Anyway, this is the Promise Land podcast. It was a long intro, actually. This is the Promise Land podcast with me, Scott Saunders, talking all things Manchester United. Today, it's finances, unfortunately. But yeah, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and any other audio platform you may use. Also, subscribe on the YouTube channel as well, the Promise Land and Manchester United podcast. Please like the video. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Also, back on the audio, please give a 5-star review and a comment if you would. Please do so. If you haven't done so already, I would really, really appreciate that. Also, follow me on social media as well at _Scott Saunders on X, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm also on Blue Sky. Link is in the description. So, United have released their financials, their latest ones, revealing a £27 million-ish loss. Very characteristic of the football club. Nowadays, 4.1 million of that goes to Dan Ashworth, who was hired, worked for 5 months, and then was sacked. 10.4 million has gone to Erik ten Hag and his staff after he was kept on, and then had an extension triggered on his contract, only to be sacked 3-ish months later after 9 games, I think it was, because of a poor start to the season. Rafa Varane has also spoken out today in an interview with The Athletic, talking about how he feels he was exiled from the team by Erik ten Hag to make a point, and that Erik ten Hag had lost the players even through the summer, so he was surprised that ten Hag stayed. Really good interview. You should go read it if you haven't done so already. It's on the Athletic's website. And obviously, look, the financials are awful. They really are. I feel as though, look, I think from my understanding of this anyway, from the reports that I've read, from my own interpretation of it. I feel like Dan Ashworth was appointed after 5 months of chasing, came in and then has tried to do things along the lines of a lot more friendly, let's say, than INEOS have wanted to do it. So, for example, he is described as a people pleaser and wanted to keep people happy. And ultimately, I think he was one of the key factors in Erik ten Hag and the contract extension that he got. 10.4 million, like I say, going towards Erik ten Hag and his staff. Ten Hag was sacked, and then Ashworth followed pretty soon after. So to me, I think they're both interlinked. And I have read in certain places, can't remember exactly when it was because it was a good few weeks ago now, that Jim Ratcliffe did not feel as though Ashworth was being ruthless enough with the cuts that he needed to make to the operations in the footballing department. So, look, I think what we are getting out of this, and every message that INEOS are really sending at the moment, is that they are being ruthless with the footballing side of the club. And they don't really care. They are trimming this down, trying to make it as lean an operation as possible because it's losing a hell of a lot of money. And that, unfortunately, means that unpopular decisions are going to be made. People that matter are going to be affected. And look, they should take some flack because they have made mistakes. And I think even they would admit that they have made mistakes. Maybe it would help if they came out and admitted they had made mistakes. Maybe that would be something a little bit better for people to digest. But my take on this, really, INEOS are at fault. But I think there is a new aligned plan in place that we've seen from 2025 and the start of 2025. So what I think happened in the summer, and this is just my take, right? This is just my take, but this is kind of why I'm on the side of trying to understand what INEOS are doing rather than going and criticizing them and saying they're doing things wrong. There's stuff that they're doing that I don't agree with at all. And I've said that numerous times on this podcast. But what I think has happened here is Dan Ashworth has been appointed into the system of operation as sporting director. Jim Ratcliffe has seen that he's not been ruthless enough, has wasted very little time in paying him off 4 million quid, like I say. And now there's an operation that's left full of Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox, Dave Brailsford is in there, Christopher Vivell. His influence is growing in the transfer and recruitment department as well. And there's a new footballing operation there without Dan Ashworth. Whether they appoint a new sporting director to replace Ashworth remains to be seen. They've also hired a new CBO this week in Mark Armstrong. I believe he's come from PSG. So what they're trying to do here is, I've got it written down here because, obviously I need to make sure that I'm getting things right and saying things right. I think they're streamlining the club in terms of their operating costs, and people like to say, do it for the players too. I'll get to that later in the episode because I feel like that will come. That will come. And I'll maybe run into the numbers, according to my workings anyway, of how much they could be saving based on the players that could be leaving the club in the summer on free transfers and the players that have been essentially shipped out of the club on loan that they don't want anymore, and how much they could save if they get rid of them permanently. We'll see. But look, I think they're making a big clear out here. And I think what we're seeing now is, without Ashworth, with Ruben Amorim installed on recommendation of, I think it was Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada, they are the ones that have wanted to sort this out. Ruben Amorim is has a very precise way of doing things. He knows what kind of profiles that he wants. It seems to align with what INEOS's strategy is in terms of the recruitment at the moment. That is, sign young players with high energy, good physicality, good technical ability for cheap, not massive money. Try and build a team full of players who are just ready to run for the team. No egos. I think that you'll see a lot more of this. Maybe more signings, the likes of profile of Dorgu in different positions. Kenda has obviously been talked about. I did a podcast on Giovanni Kenda from Sporting just a few weeks ago as well. Go check that out if you haven't done so already on all the feeds and on YouTube as well. I think the transfer strategy has changed, basically. I think Ashworth was a little too soft in INEOS's eyes, and ultimately it has led to him losing his job. INEOS want to go through this with an absolute ruthlessness that you could argue is necessary because of the money that United are consistently losing over a period of years, which has put them on the brink of PSR breaks and PSR breaches. It's just necessary, I think, in their eyes. And that I'm trying to understand why they're doing it rather than looking at them and saying and criticizing them for it, even though I don't believe that every decision they are making is fair. That's kind of my position on this, right? So, what I want to try and get through today is I wanted to explain that to start with and make sure that I set out that position. I also wanted to later in the episode go and talk about the players and talk about how much saving they could make. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the profile of players that they'll end up signing a little later on as well as part of that. But one thing I haven't mentioned yet is I'm just squared that. In these latest financial results, it now appears that £1 billion in interest payments have been made on the debt that was leveraged onto the club since the Glazers bought it in 2005, which is absolutely disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting. You do not need me to sit there and tell you that this is a cancer on the football club. It is. Reality. Look, I saw there's a protest being planned for the 9th of March, and I fully back it. I think it's 9th of March, ahead of the Arsenal game. Fully back it. Absolutely. Need to show that the decisions that are being made are affecting real people. And if there are cuts that need to be made, there are other places to do it. And I feel like putting fans out of pocket by raising ticket prices is just not the right way to do it. It really affects the relationship of the supporters with the club. I even get emails now saying tickets available to all fans to come and watch. I think it was the Fulham game in the FA Cup. I had one yesterday. So there's going to be protests based on how the club is being run at the moment, how ruthless it is. And ultimately, I feel like the fans are going to be the ones that's one of the group of people that are going to be suffering because of this. And I don't feel like that should be the way that it is, because the football is the worst that I've ever seen in my lifetime. It is that bad at the moment. And why should people pay more money in order to go and watch that? On the reality side of it, I would love a full sale. I always wanted to, in the right circumstances. And ultimately, I feel there are maybe suggestions and maybe realities in saying that this club will never be the same until a full sale is made. Will that ever come? That is my concern. And my position on this has been, you could be that voice that talks about full sale and advocates for it. I will always be that. I will always want this ownership, the Glazer family, to be away from this club, the debt cleared, obviously. But the way that I take this podcast oftentimes is that I just look at the reality for what it is. I'm sure that INEOS would like full control of this as well, but all they could do was get that stake. I think it's up at about 28%-ish at the moment, and control the football in operation, which is the arrangement that they've got. Whether a full sale is ever completed to INEOS remains to be seen. And the argument of the likes of Ratcliffe getting in bed with the Glazers is completely, look, it is happening. It has happened. And that's a point for criticism for a lot of people. And I get it. But for the way that I see it is Ratcliffe has found a way in because, and this hasn't changed for me, I feel like he wants to leave a legacy, a positive legacy on Manchester United, the one that turned the club around from the brink of financial ruin. You know, if INEOS hadn't put, the latest financial results say this as well, if INEOS hadn't put in the 80 million quid that they had put in, United's cash position would be around 15 million quid, which is absolutely ridiculous. I feel like I look at this and I look at Ratcliffe and the way that he's doing things and the way that he has got into the club. And I think the only option for him to get in was to do what he's done. Now, I'll go back to this. It looks like to me, the first port of call has been that they're streamlining the club in terms of their operating costs. And that is probably the right way to do it from a business side. Not talking personal side, but from a business side, that is probably the right way to do it in their eyes. And now people ask and people say, do it for the players as well. please do it for the players, because we know that there's a group of players on that pitch that aren't performing to their absolute maximum. And I've spoken about this many, many times. I've spoken about a clear out that's been needed for a long, long time. Even when I was doing this podcast with Rob, we would have discussions about whether a clear out was ever actually possible. Some people could say, and there's a fair argument to suggest, that a clear out has already been made in terms of the first 11 and how different it is now from what it was just a few years ago. I think that is fair. But to me, the approach and the difference in transfer strategy has only really changed from January to me. In terms of sales and stuff, maybe back through last summer. But I think, as I touched on earlier on, Dan Ashworth was put in charge of the sporting operation and was deemed not ruthless enough to make the decisions necessary to take the club forward. And it maybe wasn't aligned with the rest of the group that wanted to go with the approach of signing young players for relatively cheap, developing them into a system, and whether they go on to be sold or whether they go on to be regular first team players, we will see how that goes. I feel like there was a lack of alignment there, and maybe you could look at INEOS and the decision makers there for not doing their profiling of Ashworth properly. That's a complete fair criticism. But what I will say is that they acted pretty swiftly after realizing that Ashworth was not the man that they wanted in charge of that, because he was not operating in the way that this group of people who were in charge wanted to operate. And I don't think of the word ruthless when I think of Dan Ashworth. I do think of the word ruthless when I think of everybody else, and I think of the communications, and I think of the moves that they're making. He just didn't seem to fit. And where I think we are now, personally, in terms of recruitment and the way that they're looking to do things, I think we just haven't seen it too much yet. I think we're in a better place in terms of the ambition and what the club want to do. It's just they don't have too much wiggle room at the moment to actually put it in place. And all we got to see in January was the signing of Patrick Dorgu, for example, for any, massive amount of money in terms of multiple millions. We also saw the arrivals of Aiden Heaven, Diego Leon, and I forget who the last player is. You could tell me that in the comments, but I think there is another one, obviously. I think that's the strategy moving forward, right? And I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see more of that in the summer. And what they will get to do in the summer is what everybody has been asking for in terms of getting rid of some of the footballers and some of the players. Now, I'll talk about that in a second, because I think it's a pretty extensive section that maybe I should go through, because I've even cooked up the numbers. They're not accurate. Obviously, they're as accurate as I can make them, but obviously you don't really have access to the weekly wage, and you can work out amortization, this kind of thing. So you have a pretty good idea of that, but you don't know with what the agreement is, and being out of the Champions League, you don't know how these numbers are exactly affected. So they might be a little bit off, but hopefully after this break in a second, I'll try and explain why I think United could be in for the summer clear out that we've been waiting for a while. Now, as it turns out, before the break, if that came in, there was not another player outside of Aiden Heaven and Patrick Dorgu to join in January. And the player that I was probably thinking of was Diego Leon, who I mentioned anyway. So, needed to take some time there to realize the mistake I'd made, or lack of mistake that I'd made. But look, right? So there are massive shouts for Man United to get rid of the players. We've seen this week more reports, and I did do a tweet about this, which got a bit of pickup. I'll try and find it now. Did do a tweet about this, which said and referenced the problems that United are having. So the report was, some players are beginning to lose faith in Ruben Amorim's system as results and performances continue to suffer. The group believe that even when United win, it's largely down to individual moments of quality and good fortune rather than tactical triumph. How long have we been saying that? How many different managers have we been saying that about? Ruben Amorim is not the first. that this has happened to. Whether it's true or not, I'm not going to really get into that. I think there probably could be some bones of truth about it, which I'll get to in a second. But think of what Ruben Amorim is trying to do at the moment. High intensity football. He wants them to run like dogs. He wants these players to be physically fit, to press from the front, to press with the centre backs going high, to press with the midfielders covering every blade of grass that they possibly can in matches. He thinks that physical dominance and physical exertion will get the most out of the tactical system that he's trying to play. Now think back, right? Erik ten Hag was the manager before him. Erik ten Hag and his Ajax teams played really entertaining football and had high energy about them. He signed a hell of a lot of their players, obviously. But what Ten Hag wanted to do from the beginning, and then he went a few months down the line when he was getting criticism about his playing style, he said, we can't play like Ajax because the players aren't the same. So he tried to play the football that he wanted to play. For the first game in his Premier League tenure at home to Brighton, lost 2-1. And the second game in his tenure in the Premier League, 4-0 defeat at Brentford, where the world was melting down. It felt like at the time things could never get any worse. Turns out they can somehow, and we're living it now. But what happened after that? The club panicked. They signed Casemiro for 60-odd million quid on a 300k a week deal. He's one of their highest earners. I think he may be the highest earner remaining at the club as it stands. They signed Antony as well for 86-ish million pounds, and that is proven to be one of the worst transfers in Premier League history, probably both of those. So they are signs of panic. Signs of panic. United have still 300 million, according to their financial results, outstanding in terms of transfer fees that they owe. They're probably still paying those deals off. I don't know exactly how much of them have been paid off, but they have a revolving credit facility which has come down, which I think they put those deals on. It's basically a credit card. And I'm holding up an imaginary credit card if you're watching this on YouTube. They put that money on, or those transfer fees on credit, essentially. And they're probably paying interest on those transfers that they put through as well. So it all folds in to absolute disaster. And if your team isn't performing on the pitch, if you're not getting in the Champions League and you're 15th in the Premier League, things get a hell of a lot harder to continue operating. It's been said before that United are paying like a Champions League club, but are not in the Champions League. And that's essentially what we're seeing at the moment. Whether they can get in by winning the Europa League this season remains to be seen. But what I said around those reports, some players that are beginning to lose faith in Ruben Amorim's system. I was talking about Ten Hag. I'll continue back, and I'll go back to, remember Ralf Rangnick's football and how awful that was. What's Ralf Rangnick famous for? The godfather of the gegenpress, or whatever it is. High intensity, high energy football. He looked at the situation and he said, open heart surgery, that famous speech. Sign players on their first or second contract, or maybe their second contract. Get them working hard. It will take 6 months to a year, maybe 3 transfer windows or whatever, and it can be done if you do it properly. In the end, what football we got out of Ralf Rangnick's Man United was some of the worst stuff I think we've all ever seen. It was like United were just existing in a moment, and we couldn't decipher what it was because the players weren't the right fits. He talked about contracts as well, as I just mentioned. There's a lot of players at United who are among the highest earners in the Premier League, let alone at, and in Europe even, let alone just at Manchester United. Now, go back to that before Ralf Rangnick. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wanted, eventually, after he brought the players around, he wanted to play high-intensity football. You remember this? You remember that he wanted, I think it was Mason Greenwood, Jadon Sancho, and Marcus Rashford in a front three. He wanted high energy, he wanted high speed, he wanted transition football, and he wanted this United team to be among the best and most energetic teams in the country, I think. Then, the thing that killed Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's United, arguably, was the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo. So you bring him in, he's not going to press, is he? So it kind of ruins your entire press. Ten Hag then inherited that problem and kicked Ronaldo out of the team, kicked Rafa Varane out of the team eventually as well, kicked Jadon Sancho out of the team. And you just go round in circles. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is that Ruben Amorim wants players who are high energy, will work really hard, will run like dogs. So is there any surprise, and this is what I said in my tweet, is there any surprise that these reports are coming out again, whether they're true or not? You can see that on the evidence of the 20 matches that Ruben Amorim has had in charge of Manchester United, that they are not playing the style of football that he wants to play. He talks about wanting different profiles almost all the time in his interviews. I think he said it before the Tottenham game as well. We know we need different profiles. The fact that he's saying United need different profiles suggests that the players that he has are not fit for purpose in terms of what he wants to do. Results are poor, mainly due to a chunk of the players knowing that their own time is coming to an end should this system persist. Now, we don't know who the players are. We don't know how true it is. This has been denied in some quarters as well. And maybe there are a group of players that are firmly behind Ruben Amorim. Maybe there's a group of players in there that are not behind Ruben Amorim. But look, if you think of it this way, Ruben Amorim has come in and he is going to play 3-4-3, 3-4-2-1, and he is not changing his system. He said it many times. I am not changing the fundamentals and the principles of what I want to do. He knows at the same time that the players that he has are not capable of doing it. So is there any surprise that these reports are coming out? No, not to me, because a lot of the players in that dressing room are not going to be there for much longer. The only way that they have a chance of surviving is for a coaching change. Potentially another one, which I do not want that to happen at all. But I'm just saying it's them versus him. And the club this time, at the point that they're at now, absolutely must back what Ruben Amorim wants to do, because Ruben Amorim's philosophy is aligned with the transfer strategy that I think we are starting to see from the start of January. Now, go back to the summer. I think that was muddled because of the Ashworth thing, because of the Ten Hag dynamic. I think, for example, Joshua Zirkzee was probably signed as the type of striker that Erik Ten Hag wanted to use. Joshua Zirkzee, although he's been playing well recently, Amorim has admitted himself, is not the kind of striker that he wants. So there's a bit of muddle there. And yes, you can blame INEOS for that. But they rectified it as soon as they realized that was a problem. It came at a great cost to them. They deserve criticism for it. But at the same time, what we have now and what we have installed from the start of 2025 is a different transfer strategy. The club wants to sign young players, the likes of Patrick Dorgu, who are physically and technically able to deal with the system that Ruben Amorim wants to play. Now, what I will say, and what I've wanted to get onto for this entire episode, I've been talking about this for a few weeks as well, is just how much money Man United are wasting on players they're not using. And when we talk about cutting costs, and when we talk about when people say, why can't they get rid of the players? We all look at it and we all think the same thing. We all want a renovation of this squad. We all want young, hungry, first, second contract footballers coming in and giving their absolute all for this football club. That's what we want. But it's not like you can just cancel the contracts of these guys, because it will impact your PSR. It will impact your outgoings. And because these guys earn so much more money than your average staff, it's not as easy. Whether people have been through redundancy and that kind of thing in the UK or anywhere else, I'm not sure how it works in other countries, but there's usually essentially an agreement which you come to, which means that you kind of leave with a payoff. But generally, I think those kind of contracts are just in place until a notice period is invoked by one of the parties, right? With these players, they are contracted to 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. And the club are liable for paying those agreements in full because they have signed contracts which are exactly spelled out in terms of how much money these players are making per week, in terms of bonuses, in terms of loyalty bonus, all of this kind of thing, right? So it's very, very difficult for them to just say, you're out, because it will implicate and probably work against the club later on where they want to reinvest. So they have to do it a little bit more carefully. And that's the difference. It's awful. It is awful. Having been through redundancy myself, it ain't great. It's not fun. But what I'm trying to do here, as I said at the top of the episode, is try and get in the mind of what INEOS are trying to do and understand the challenges that they have, even while I agree with what some of the stuff that they're doing is awful. You know, I just had to double down on that point. But like, for example, 4 players in the Man United first team squad are out of contract at the end of June 2025. So Tom Heaton, age 38, Johnny Evans, age 37, Christian Eriksen, age 33, and Victor Lindelof, age 30, all out of contract in 2025. Total earnings per what I can gather, and obviously these numbers could vary. I'm not entirely sure if they're accurate or not, but it's probably ballpark around about right. £380,000 a week they are paying for those 4 players. Tom Heaton's third choice goalkeeper. Johnny Evans, as much as you love him, is 37 years old and only ever really should have come in as final choice centre-back. I think he's injured at the moment, so I'm not sure when we're going to see him next. Christian Eriksen is pretty much confirmed that he will leave on a free transfer in the summer. Victor Lindelof, you barely see him. He was on the bench at the weekend against Tottenham. But that there is £380,000 a week that United are paying. That amounts per year to nearly £20 million per year. So that is going to come off their books because I don't see any of those players there playing for Manchester United again. I just don't see it. Now, you got to think here in terms of wages that they're saving. So that's £20 million coming off the books in 2025. You don't anticipate that any of those players will stay because of their ages, because of their lack of good fit. Maybe Tom Heaton stays around and plays a different role, maybe plays third choice goalkeeper. But in terms of the ruthlessness that INEOS have been showing, and especially if United are out of Europe as well, I would not be surprised if Tom Heaton's place in that team as third choice goalkeeper is occupied by a youth player. Wouldn't surprise me. Let's talk more. 2026. 4 players are out of contract in 2026. Jadon Sancho, Terrell Malacia, Casemiro, and Harry Maguire. Harry Maguire's contract was extended by a year. I think probably for United to extend out his amortization cost, which after that, I think he would have signed a 6-year deal in the end. So it was a 5+1. So yes, about 6 years, which brings about an amortization cost of £13.3 million per year amortization cost. Now, if you don't, I'm sure people do understand this, but just in case you don't, in case you're new to it, when a club buys a player, Harry Maguire was signed for £80 million, right? In accounting for football clubs, that fee of £80 million is put down on the books in brackets of 6. Let's just say it's divided by 6 and it's put down 13.3 million per year over those 6 years to amount to the 80 million. So it's just an accounting trick, which means that football clubs are able to just have a little bit more flexibility with what they're doing. So Harry Maguire and his book value per year at the moment is 13.3 million pounds. So theoretically, maybe I'll explain this, right? So at the end of this season, Harry Maguire's remaining amortization-ish, and I say again, these numbers aren't exact, but if United, for example, wanted to sell Harry Maguire in the summer, and they found a deal for 15 million quid from Everton, West Ham, Newcastle, something like that, they would actually make book profit and PSR profit on Harry Maguire because the amortization cost is lower than 15 million pounds. So now, hopefully, you can kind of understand what United's approach here is. It also means, though, that they can't take transfer fees lower than that amortization cost. Otherwise, they'll lose money on that. So I'm not talking about, I don't know whether they'll sell Harry Maguire or let his contract dwindle down to nothing. Whether he ends up signing on reduced terms at the end of his term, I don't know. That remains to be seen. But Jadon Sancho and Tyrell Malacia have been loaned out. They both have, in Sancho's case anyway, has massive, massive wages, which United have managed to clear off a chunk of to Chelsea. Casemiro is the only other one that is a big problem. But I'll run through all of these now. So in terms of the wages per week and the wages per year of what I said they'd end up saving on the 4 players that were out of contract in 2025, in 2026, that wage per year is around £43 million. So if they got rid of Jadon Sancho, Terrell Malacia, Casemiro, and Harry Maguire, let's say at the start of July, they would probably save themselves in wages £43 million over the course of that year. So, and all of those players there, Heaton, Evans, Eriksen, Lindelof, Sancho, Malacia, Casemiro, leave out Harry Maguire because he is playing a part. Those 7 players are not contributing to the first team. But they can't sell them unless they're able to strike a deal above the amortization value of the remainder of their deal. So in Casemiro's case, let's say July 1st comes along and you enter the final year of the July 1st to June 30th period. Jadon Sancho, who United have already agreed to sell to Chelsea. From my calculations, and this could be wrong, like I say, I think United have, dependent on how well Chelsea do, have agreed a sale of Jadon Sancho to Chelsea via an obligation for in the region of 20 to 25 million pounds. So because Sancho will have 1 year left on his contract next year, they could actually make a profit on him in amortization terms, which should mean that it's easier for United to reinvest that money. Casemiro's book value at going into next season will be around £15 million-ish. Don't know for sure again. But I think that value at the start of this season, they would have had to sell Casemiro for around £30 million in order to make a profit on the books on him, which is just not going to happen unless a bid was coming in from Saudi Arabia. So if United go into this summer and try to sell Casemiro again, they'd only really, I think, need to make do a deal for around 50 million quid to just make a square, even sale on him in terms of his amortization value. They'd also then save on his wages. So that's 15.6-ish million pounds a year. So you kind of get where I'm going with this, right? The following year, 2027, Anthony is out of contract. Luke Shaw is out of contract. The following year, Marcus Rashford is out of contract. What I totaled up with all of the players that I've listed there, plus some of the others that I think United are likely to sell based on whether... Look, I've accounted for players that are out of contract. I've accounted for players that have been loaned out that aren't part of the first team picture. And I've accounted for Casemiro as well because I just think that Man United want to sell him. And I think it's probably more possible to do it this summer than it was last. If all those players go, nine players, that would amount to around 111-ish million pounds based on 9 players leaving. 111-ish million pounds in savings. That's such a burden on the team because all of those 9 players there, Heaton, Evans, Eriksen, Lindelof, Sancho, Malacia, Anthony, Rashford, and Casemiro, are not contributing to the first team picture. And it's not like United can just go, "Nut, your contract is cancelled," because they owe all of that money that I've just mentioned to all of those players. So they would have to pay them off, essentially. And it's just not in their best interest. They would prefer, obviously, to loan them out or to sell them or keep them around to play part of the first team picture until they can sell them. So there is so much wastage in this first team in financial terms. So I'm looking at what INEOS have been doing with the staff and the ticketing and the hiring of Mark Armstrong. It's what they're trying to do at the moment is streamline the off the field stuff and the operating costs in terms of trimming staff, down in their commitment, trimming the operating cost. And then they've hired a new CBO with good experience to come in and potentially increase revenues as well. United are 4th in the Deloitte list for revenues. Now, you can see each move that they're making and what they're trying to do. I can anyway. Hopefully what I'm saying in this episode could maybe shed some light on it. Now, I'll say it again, probably put it in the description as well. These numbers aren't actually accurate. I don't know. And nobody really does know unless they're in the club. But you can get a good estimate of just how bad things are if you look into the numbers a little bit. In terms of the players that I've listed there, they are the ones that they could save money on that we know are pretty much out of the picture. Then comes the question of other players. Luke Shaw and Mason Mount. Mason Mount is going to be very, very difficult to sell because of the wages that he's on and because of the cost remaining on his contract, or cost remaining of his transfer fee amortized over the course of the next 3 years, or 3.5 years in this case. They'd need to, just off the top of my head, probably need to be looking at £35 million back from Mason Mount in order to post amortization profit on him, which isn't going to happen because he's not playing football. So I don't see that happening. Luke Shaw, out of contract in 2027. Is anybody going to pay for Luke Shaw? He'd probably go down by now as profit, even for £10 million-ish, because United bought him 11 years ago. But we'll see. His wages are massive. Mason Mount's wages are pretty massive as well, but those players are not playing football. So the only way that they'd really go about it, especially in Luke Shaw's case, unless there's interest from elsewhere, is by speaking to him and saying, can we come to an agreement for you to depart? I don't know whether that'll happen. I'm not entirely sure. I think I did say a good few months ago that I don't think you'll see the best version of Man United until a lot of these contracts are sorted out and a lot of these contracts have expired. It's just the way that it is. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about was the sales of players that are popular. And obviously, that's not very popular. Nobody really wants to see that happen. But it might be a necessity for United to reinvest. So I've listed 9 players there a few minutes ago of players that I just think are going to go because they're either out on loan or they're out of contract. I've listed a couple of players that are unlikely to probably go because of their injury records and their earnings. But then there's probably a group of 3-4 players that I look at and that I think you're probably a very valuable sellable asset, especially if United come 15th and don't finish and don't qualify for the Champions League by winning the Europa League, or don't win the FA Cup and get into the Europa League. I could really see, maybe this is unpopular, how much do you think what Bruno Fernandes is going to want to stick around here after the season if United don't win anything, if he doesn't see anything getting better? It might be just time to have a conversation like that. And we obviously had the conversation about Garnacho and Mainu at the in the January transfer window, and how United have made it clear that both of those players could be up for sale for the right price. United held out for 70 million for Garnacho and didn't sell him in the end. It brought criticism of betraying traditions, and yes, I get that. I get that completely. But when you look at the numbers, 70 million pounds in profit, pure profit, that word pure profit, would go a hell of a long way to United reinvesting in their first team squad. Same for Mainu. 80 million quid if they managed to get that from Chelsea, for example. It would be probably the most unpopular transfer of all. But at the moment, it's on the table. And I feel like, as unpopular as it is, it might be worth... Look, I'm just trying to explain my point of view on this and how I see things and how I understand things. Not everything is going to be absolutely right, but this is just the way that I look at it. And I wanted to do a podcast about it to essentially tell you what I was thinking. So if there's anything wrong, don't hold it against me, because I'm not going to be entirely accurate, but I feel like these numbers are probably thereabouts accurate enough to give you a good picture of what exactly is happening and what exactly is possible. Now, I put down potentially Bruno Fernandes, who has earned the right, let's be honest, to, if he wants to go and there's a club that wants him, United could probably make decent profit on him, even though he signed a contract until 2027, because he saw out the first 5 years or so of his contract. He signed a new one until 2027 with an option for 28. But at the moment, I don't see many players. I'd probably put Bruno in this. I'd probably put Kobbie Mainoo in this. I'd probably put Garnacho in this as well. And even Joshua Zirkzee. There aren't many players in this first team squad at the moment that exactly fit in to what Ruben Amorim wants to do. And when I talk about the club being ruthless and the ruthlessness being there from the very top levels, it might just be worth preparing mentally for more and for a massive sale. It might be worth preparing for that. I'm not saying I like it at all, but I'm just trying to explain how I think the club are thinking. You'd make a hell of a lot of money on Garnacho. You'd make a hell of a lot of money on Kobbie Mainoo as well. You'd be selling your soul a bit, absolutely. But needs must in this circumstance for INEOS, given the situation that they've come into. In terms of Zirkzee, I don't see... Look, I think Xerxes been playing really well lately, but the fact that Amorim is coming out and saying he's not a natural number 9, he's not... I'm paraphrasing, he's not my type of number 9. The fact that United signed him for around 36.5 million and they put him on a 5-year contract, I think it was, last summer. The fact that that deal was relatively cheap means that, especially if he keeps playing well, but shows that he isn't a perfect fit for the team, potentially a sale of Xerxes. There's lots of clubs in Italy that like him. Whether they have the money to put up remains to be seen. But if United received a bid of the same money they bought him for, or for 40 million quid or something like that, that would be clean profit. Like 10 million-ish of clean profit on Joshua Zirkzee, depending on how much it is. I think his book value at the moment, amortization value, would be around 29.2 million-ish. So they would have paid off, 7 million of that on the books, 7.3 million of that on the books in the first year. So you'd be making that money back on transfer fees and PSR. You'd also be saving on the wages of all these players as well. So look, there's so many players at this club that are earning so much money. And just to tie back, I talked about Casemiro a little bit, but shifting Casemiro out based on the wages that he's on is going to be very, very difficult. For the transfer fee that United would need in order to break even on his amortization cost, that would be a difficult deal to do. Casemiro has said this week that he wants to stay until the end of his contract. Whether United can find a way out remains to be seen. But United need more mobile midfielders than Casemiro, regardless of whether he wants to stay or not. We can all see it on the pitch. Yeah, so I got a bit of stick the other day for saying that, for picking on Casemiro in the Tottenham game, but we can all see that it's not the exact right fit. You only need to look at like Atalanta and Edison, maybe. Atalanta went out of the Champions League last night. Edison from Atalanta, if they could do a deal for him and partner him with Mamadou Ugarte in the midfield, that's a pretty mobile midfield. I don't know. We'll see. But United have a lot of work to do, right? And with the financials dropping today, and with the fact that I said that I wanted to do this podcast a few weeks ago, that I haven't got around to it yet, I just felt like it was the right day to do it and to try and explain what I think INEOS are doing and how I think INEOS are approaching this. Now, I'll say one more time, not everything is going to be absolutely correct here. I don't know. We don't know. If you're not in the club, you don't know. You can make some assumptions, but you don't know all the hidden costs, this kind of thing. But when people say just get rid of the players, it's not as easy to just do it. It's not as easy. They're contracted to certain years. There's certain guarantees that the club have to make unless they find a way out of it and find a buyer. So, look, it's going to be a long road back. It's going to be... The stuff on the pitch at the moment is awful. I just hope that United can win a couple of matches just to allay the fears of getting sucked into any kind of relegation battle. I still don't think that'll happen. But you never know. You never know how bad and how drastically this could sink just because of how bad it is at the moment. But there's a hell of a lot of work to do for the people in charge of United. I think there's a different strategy in place. So just to top up again, I think from January 2025, we have seen the installation of a new transfer strategy. Personally, that's what I think. I think the summer, which INEOS deserved criticism for, was muddled because they brought in Dan Ashworth, who was not the right fit for what they were trying to do in terms of ruthlessness and in terms of the fact that he didn't really want to upset people. INEOS doing it differently. I don't agree with a lot of the decisions that they make. And this podcast has just been about trying to explain what I think they're doing and the challenges that they have and the reasons why they're making such ruthless decisions in other aspects of the club. So, look, hopefully that made some sense. If you got any questions for me and you've listened to the podcast, get in touch with me on social media at @_ Scott Saunders on X, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm also on Blue Sky. Link is in the description. Please subscribe to this podcast as well. Apple, Spotify, etc., etc. For all the audio platforms, give a 5-star review to the show and subscribe on YouTube as well. The Promise and Manchester United podcast. Leave a comment for me there. Probably the most likely place outside of Twitter that you can get in touch with me, that I'll see it. And yeah, hopefully this has helped. But I'll see you soon. I'll see you later this week. United play Everton on Saturday, so I'll be back before then to talk about whatever's happening. And yeah, it's a difficult time at the moment. It really is. But hopefully what I've done today can try and shed some light on why I take the approach that I take and why I just, as much as I would love a full sale, I think everybody would, right? You can shout full sale till you're blue in the face on social media. It's not going to do anything to me. So this is the way that I'm trying to operate things. Keeps me a lot more mentally sane than if I was just complaining about stuff all the time. So anyway, that's it from me, from Scott. This has been the Promise and Podcast. Until next time, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. See you soon.